Morning. Hello. I got my timing wrong this morning, but it seems like that's okay because I don't think anybody's with me today. Maybe anybody's with me because I'm late. I went out for a walk, celebrating how successful I was in managing to go out for a walk before my practice. But then I wasn't that successful because I was then late. Oh well. Welcome to anybody, gosh, I'm red in the face. Welcome to anybody who's joining, whether live or later. This is a follow-along practice, meaning I can't see you, can't give feedback, can't say, do you really want to do that? Or put your hand here, not there, or it'll be easier for your hip if you do this, or it'll be healthier for your shoulder or if you do this, or whatever I would normally say if I was teaching. So don't push it into pain. It is not a case of no pain, no gain. It is a case of no pain, lots of gradual soft improvement, comfort, curiosity and pleasure. So that's the basis on which we're working. And I'm going to start by lying down and I switch into the first person so that I'm talking through what I'm doing as well as what I'm noticing and thinking, so that anybody following along can just use what I'm saying as a kind of guide for their own exploration. So I'm lying down, I've got my knees bent and my feet standing. I'm not trying to lie in any correct position, I'm just lying in a way that's comfortable for me. I'm trying to just let go. Oh, I'm late so I forgot, but I meant to say every day really this week I should say I'm having a week off next week. I might still do my daily practice, but I'm not going to live stream it. I'm not going to do anything public facing next week. I'm on a holiday, at home holiday. So, yeah. And this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. As my friend said last week, I think everybody's already aware this year. But I'm kind of doing a series of things that are a little bit more obviously mental health focused rather than just mobilizing and strengthening, although I'm also interested in getting rid of this silly idea that mind and body are separate, like mental health is divorced from physical health, and actually both, they're completely entangled, they're part of general health and well-being in a multiplicity of interrelated ways. So I'm still doing a physical practice, a movement practice, still with a lot of awareness, but with a little bit more focus on mental health. So I'm just lying down, I've lengthened my legs as I felt I was able to, and I'm taking into account now, rather taking note of how I'm making contact with the floor. I did this practice yesterday of sort of splitting myself in two, and I'm going to go back to that without talking through it for anybody who's not with me. I won't go through it from scratch because it was the majority of yesterday's practice, so not possible to do it quickly, but just to reference it, dividing the self into down the midline, and as vague or inaccurate as I am, I'll try and do that quickly, scanning, almost kind of taking in my whole body all at once, so I can feel the length and direction of the legs, the way the pelvis makes contact with the ground, that it's tilted a little bit more to one side and down in my case. the volume of the pelvis, the volume and line of the spine and torso, the belly and back, the chest and shoulders, and arms on the ground and head, and I'm just feeling that I can split myself in two down the center, like a cheese wire cutting through soft clay, and I can have that really distinct sense of my midline. And I just check in with the different parts of myself. Can I split the crown of my head into, slice down through my face and the back of my head? And even as I slice down, it comes back together again. So yesterday I was talking about this plane of light that runs front to back through the middle of me, separating and simultaneously uniting my two halves, my two sides. Noticing where I can be aware of. So I notice, for example, it's easy for me to split my head and focus on that. Then I go down to my neck and my shoulders. It's kind of easy. I get to my chest, my upper chest and upper back, and it's harder for me there. My focus wanders. It's harder for me to sense where my midline is there. I just try to stay with it down through the back and the belly. A little bit easier, I can sense a kind of wiggle through my spine at that place, from my waist down to my... I kind of space out again when I get to my lower back. It's not so clear. There's an area where I just feel kind of bunched up and less able to be specific about the sensation. But I can still compare my left and right, noticing if my right or left is longer, denser, something, anything. How do I compare? We function by noticing difference. So that's what I'm trying to do. Give my brain difference to notice. There's always difference to notice. Going down through the belly and the back, splitting my pelvis in two, and then dividing. The line continues down between my legs. And I feel which leg is lying closer to the line. Just going to look. Yeah, that was kind of right, that my left leg feels like it's lying a bit closer to my midline than my right today. I'm going to bend my knees and stand my feet again. And I just sense how I'm making contact with the ground. And I'm going to take my hands to the side of my ribs, and personally I want to go with my palms almost kind of facing the ceiling so that my shoulders can't stay neutral, and I do this, my shoulders have to move. I can slide my fingers underneath the kind of bottom of my rib cage, and then my thumb can be to the side or at the top of my waist. So I can feel bony bits of the bottom of my ribs with my hands, with my fingers. That's not easy, particularly for my right wrist, that's not easy, so I just do what's possible. And I've got the firm contact. A little bit of pressure, I would say, in towards my center. So that I can feel my ribs moving as I breathe. I can feel it from the inside, but I can also feel it with my hands. And I can feel difference between the two sides. just rest. I don't want my wrists in that position for too long, so just lay my arms down and keep breathing, and I have my eyes closed for a bit. Again, my feet can be anywhere that's comfortable for me, but I keep my knees bent and my feet standing because it's a little easier for my spine to be kind of longer and not arched if I have my knees bent and my feet standing. I can feel where my hands were touching on my ribs. I feel the difference between the two sides of myself. I feel that one side of my ribs feels bigger, more voluminous. When I placed my hands there, I could feel that one side of my ribs was initiating opening before the other. So I'm really familiar with this difference between my left and right. But I wasn't actually familiar with the fact that not only is the shape different, but the timing is different. So I'm going to put my hands there again, and I'm going to come back to my sensing my low ribs. My fingertips are at the back of my ribs. My palms are on the side of my ribs. My thumb is at the front of my ribs. There's a firm, spread out contact. My hands are just sort of gently supporting and holding and being moved by my ribs, containing and being moved by my ribs as I breathe. I'm noticing my ribs, and it really takes such a focus. But I am still practicing this kind of more global awareness where I can sense the rest of myself. I can sense if my wrists start to become uncomfy and I need to break. I can sense if my hips are tight and I could maybe soften them. I could sense if I want to change the position of my feet. I could sense that with my hands in this funny position, I realize I can soften my chest more. And tightening unnecessarily around the chest and shoulders. So all of those things swim in and out of my awareness whilst I'm focusing on the movement of the breath. And there it is again. I sense one side of me not just opening up more than the other, but opening up earlier. The breath reaches more easily and sooner, therefore, into one side of my rib cage. And I just lay my arms back down and rest. And I'm going to lengthen my legs as well. These are such basic systems, so central to our being. We can do loads of big movements and training, or we can do lots of fine motor skills and focus. But these things are central. Breathing, the respiratory diaphragm, the relationship of the respiratory diaphragm to the pelvic diaphragm or the pelvic floor. All part of our breathing, the three-dimensionality of the rib cage, how it relates to the spine, how this relates to tissue, fascia, muscular tonus, the sphincters of the body contraction and release of the sphincters. And relating to the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems. Do I feel safe? Or do I feel alert? If I feel alert, is it with a calmness and a softness where I could move without stress? I could move with ease if the need arose? Or do I feel alert like somebody who is expecting danger, stressed or worried? And both of those things are necessary. But is one taking over? Is one dominating? Most of us have slight overactivated sympathetic nervous system, whether it's due to trauma or whether it's due to just the environment that we live in, having to be alert all the time, being overstimulated. I'm just going to bend my knees and stand my feet again. I'll feel myself settling a little into the ground. I compare the two sides of myself. I see how possible is it for me now to just notice my left and right and sense my midline. And I'm always moving to keep myself comfortable. So whenever I feel like I could just make myself a little bit more comfortable, I'm allowed to do that. I'm going to take my hands again underneath the back of the body, and I'm just really now, my thumb is with my fingers now and my palms are facing the floor this time. That's a little bit easier for my wrists. My shoulders still have to move. I'm certainly not in a neutral alignment with my upper back or my shoulder girdle, but I feel the support of my hands under my low ribs. And I'm going to very, very softly roll my pelvis up and down. And this isn't for the sake of rolling the pelvis at all. Rather, it's for the sake of feeling that when I push my feet into the floor a little bit and allow my pelvis to roll so that my lower back lengthens and the front of my pubic bone becomes a little closer to my belly button, I can feel then my low ribs pressing into my fingers a bit more. And when I come back or go the other way, fractionally just allowing my lower back to arch, my bottom to stick out, my pubic bone to move away from my belly button as my belly button spills out and down, a soft belly. As that happens, my low ribs come away from my fingers. And very softly I keep doing that. I'm not just going up and down without varying the rhythm or without feeling what I'm doing. I'm really very, very slowly doing such a small movement so that I can feel, are my hips soft? Do I have my feet where I want them? Could I soften my belly anymore? Do I need to just move my knees a little bit to allow the muscles in my calves to relax? To allow the muscles in my hips to relax? What if I let my knees come together a little bit? Am I pushing evenly with both feet and rolling my pelvis up and down evenly, or is there some deviation? Maybe I want to deviate. Maybe I want to press a little bit more into one foot so that I can feel the back of the ribs on one side opening up a little bit more, pressing into my fingers, into my hand a little bit more. Maybe I want to go the other way. What do I need to... There's no strict repetition. There's just an exploration of how I can soften, rolling the pelvis, letting the knees and feet do anything they want in order to help, and exploring how rolling the pelvis changes the contact of my back against the floor, or rather in this case against my fingers and the back of my hand. And then I just slide my fingers out while I'm pressing my feet into the floor and pressing my back into my fingers. I slowly slide my fingers out. And I bring my arms down by my side again, and I just push my legs away and rest with my legs long for a moment, relaxing. Comparing the two sides of myself. How can I sense now that midline, that glowing, luminescent plane that runs through the center of me, dividing and at the same time uniting left and right. And I bend my knees and stand my feet. And I see that I'm softening into the ground. My contact is changing, my alignment is changing. And I'm going to bring my hands now, I'm going to be a bit more sensitive with my fingertips. So just before I use my fingertips against my body, I just softly rub my thumb, the tip of my thumb against the tips of my fingers, and I just see what that feels like. Really soft. Just bringing some attention into my fingertips. And I need to shuffle on the ground so that I don't have too much pressure on one part of my back. So I just make myself comfy. And then with my kind of enlivened fingertips, I bring my fingers to, I just find the bottom end of my breastplate, my sternum, and I can feel how the sternum is this kind of bony structure. It's quite difficult to sense where the ribs start and where the breastbone ends. If we're talking about the width of the breastbone, where the ribs come out of the breastbone, it's kind of tricky to feel, for me at least. but I can feel a bony structure, and I can find the base of the breastbone because I'm just very softly digging around with my fingers, very, very softly. And so I want to find the bottom of the bony structure of the breastbone where it starts to be squidgy, and there I can feel where my bottom ribs start to come out and down from the breastbone. So the breastbone ends, there's a squidgy bit where you would get winded if somebody punched you in the solar plexus. And I can just feel the ribs coming down from there. They kind of open up and swoop down from the breastbone. And I'm just going to keep tracing there with my fingertips. I'm not digging in deep at all, but I'm just allowing my fingers to feel that there's this amazing bony structure of the rib cage, and there is muscle there. And there's no use in anybody saying, oh, but I'm fat, because you've definitely got muscle there. It doesn't matter what you look like. If you didn't have muscle there, you wouldn't be breathing. Everybody's got muscle. So I'm just tracing my fingers down. I get to a sort of place where the ribs are really coming much lower. I'm really taking my time to feel the structure of the low ribs, the bottom ribs. And it starts to be less hard in the musculature and a bit softer, like it's a bit easier for me to dig my fingers in without any effort. Maybe rather than digging, sinking is a better word. And of course, as I inhale, my fingers are pushed out slightly, and as I exhale, my fingers can kind of sink back in. And I'm just taking my time, I'm really exploring. I just want to rest my hands for a moment. As I rest my arms down, I sense my ribs and my breathing. I feel that somehow my breathing is much clearer in the area that I've been touching. And then I just bring my fingers back to where I got to, somewhere down at the front, and I can feel, especially because I'm talking, so maybe worth anybody following, just having a little sing-song or chatting to yourself about what you're feeling. Because I can feel that when I talk, muscles engage around my torso, around my belly. And when I stop talking, it becomes a little easier then to feel the ribs. And I've got my fingers now right down. I've stopped using my fingertips because it starts to be less comfortable on my wrists. And I'm now using the outer edge of my index finger with my hands a little bit cupped. My fingers together, my thumb just stays out of the way, somewhere near my palm. Just soft, my hand stays soft. And I'm just using the outer edge, like a kind of scoop, outer edge of my index fingers to trace down the sides of those ribs. So it's really important that I'm finding the bottom rib. When I get to the side, it feels a little knobbly. There's an extra rib there that doesn't wrap around all the front, so I've got to this place where I can feel the sort of extra rib at the bottom. I'm going around the side, and it starts to feel a little bit harder because around the waistline going into the back there's a lot more muscle and a lot more flesh. But I'm just digging in there, and it's really kind of the top of the waistline now because of course the bottom of the ribs forms the waistline. And I get to the place where I feel I can really just kind of dig the sides of my index fingers in at the bottom of the ribs. I've just lengthened my legs to help me soften in my hips and legs, but that also has helped me feel the waistline a little bit clearer. I'm pressing quite firmly now that I've got that feeling, and I can feel the bony bottom rib and the musculature around there. And I get to the place where if I kept going, I would really be in my back. I'm kind of getting towards the back with my fingertips around where I had my hands supporting earlier. I get to really it's the area of the kidneys, but I can still feel the bottom of the ribs. I'm interested in feeling the bottom of the ribs, even though that with my hands there I can feel the musculature around there releasing. And then I just take some deep breaths. I'm not forcing the deep breath, but I'm just feeling that, especially if I close my mouth and breathe in through my nose, that area is really expanding very clearly. There's a releasing in the musculature around there. And then I just let my arms go and I rest again. I feel a very different sense of my ribs, but more the lower section of my ribs. And I bend my knees again and I stand my feet. And I just want to get off my back for a moment. I mean, I can really sense how I'm melting into the ground and changing my contact with the floor. But I want to just roll to one side so that I release any pressure growing around my back, my pelvis. And then I take my knees in my hands and roll over my back to the other side. And I'm just resting very lazily. Taking my knees to my belly again, over my belly, rolling back to the other side. Such a soft, slow practice, working really on the deep tissue and embodied habits of myself. And I just keep rolling very softly one way and the other. And then I finish lying on one side. For me, it's really comfy to lie just with my head flopped onto the ground. But that might not be so comfy for everybody. If it's not comfortable for anybody, then you just need to put something on your head to rest. And I'm just staying here for a moment to feel, what can I feel with my breath? I'm going to close my eyes again. I'm not trying to lie in any correct way, I'm just lying in a way that's comfortable, where I can be stable lying on my side with little to no effort. Soft belly, soft jaw, soft tongue in the mouth. And I feel how I'm making contact with the ground. And this amazing fact that because of
the ground being on one side now, I can't move the ground with my breath. So my body just naturally accommodates that, and I'm breathing more into my top side. So I can feel my breath in the underside. For me, I'm lying on my left, so that means my left side. I can feel my breath in my left side against the ground a little bit. I can feel my breath in my belly. But I can feel my breath more in my right side, the top side. My ribs opening and closing. And I'm going to take my left hand, the underneath arm, and I place it, I try to find those low ribs again. And what I notice while I'm lying on this side is that suddenly that gap, I could use the top hand as well if I wanted, just to feel really clearly that suddenly that gap between my pelvis, the upper rim of my pelvis, the upper crest of the pelvis, and the bottom rib, suddenly that gap has, well, for me it's gone completely. For me, my bottom rib is actually tucked down inside the top of the rim of the pelvis. For other people, the gap will just close, and you might feel that of course there's more of a gap at the front where the ribs are a bit higher, and then there's less of a gap or no gap at all lower down. So I'm just using one hand to rest there on the low ribs, and I can also roll a little bit forwards and backwards very lightly. And I'm just trying to feel the ribs on this top side. And I am going to roll actually very slowly, very gently forwards and back. And I've taken my top arm so that my hand is resting on the floor just above my head, so that this top arm isn't in the way. And I want to feel now from my shoulder, my armpit. I want to feel from my armpit, I can feel my shoulder blade on top of my ribs. And I want to feel the ribs under the shoulder blade, all these amazing ribs under the breast, on this side of my body, and just the contact of my hand being soft but firm, spreading out with a really assured contact. It's a really, there's no doubt. There's no right or wrong, there's just feeling the ribs. And I just keep my hand in one place for a little while. And I feel the ribs expanding under my hand. And I move my hands to a slightly different area, just a slightly different area. And I feel my breath moving my ribs, moving my hand. Move my hand again, kind of cupping the bottom ribs again towards the front. I don't know if you can hear on camera that my insides and my viscera are moving, my digestion is completely moving because I'm releasing. This is deep psoas work, by the way, for anybody who has a more anatomical or a more physical practice. This connection of the ribs to the pelvis is always going to affect the diaphragm, the respiratory diaphragm, pelvic floor, all of the muscles around there, but particularly the deep psoas. And as I'm releasing the psoas, I'm also releasing my digestion. Moving my hand a little bit further back, so reaching around, and I'm actually going to now use my top hand to support my bottom elbow so that I can reach a little bit further around with my bottom arm. Might want to have a look at the screen if you're following. So my top arm holds my bottom elbow so that my bottom arm can just reach easily a little bit further around. And then I can feel my fingers supporting under the side of the bottom of my ribs. If I keep my mouth closed as I inhale, then it becomes a little clearer. And then I'm going to keep supporting my bottom elbow with my top hand to just move this bottom hand, the palm, all the way around. So kind of holding again up underneath my arm on the top side. I could also just roll forwards in order to wrap my arm around. I'm just giving myself a hug. And I'm trying to find underneath the shoulder blade. I'm going to actually do that by rolling forwards rather than supporting my arm. My bottom arm is wrapped underneath my top shoulder blade. I can feel my hip releasing on the right. I can feel tension in the groin releasing. I'm moving that hand again just a little further down. It's very instinctive. I can just roll myself as I'm comfortable, feel my ribs, move my hand, feel my ribs, feel my breath. And I want to just finish by taking my hand right up into my armpit. There's much more flesh around here, the pectoral muscles and the lats kind of get in the way of feeling the ribs, but the armpits are just the ribs basically. The armpits are just the connective crease, like the crease in the hips. The armpits are the crease that is a result of the shoulder meeting the ribs. So the armpit is ribs. I've got one thumb around the front of the shoulder, tucked up in front of the shoulder, the ball of the shoulder, and I've got the other fingers right underneath the armpit. And I just feel the ribs of the armpit. I feel that my fingers were over the top of my shoulder blade, and I want to just dig my fingers under the side of my shoulder blade so that I'm on my ribs and not on my shoulder blade, if possible. And I release and I roll onto my back and I see how I feel. I see how I'm lying. I see what a difference that makes to my quality. The quality of my experience and the quality of my muscular tonus, my alignment, my contact with the floor on my left and my right. Bend my knees and stand my feet again. Noticing my glorious asymmetry. I was asymmetrical before and I'm still asymmetrical, but in a different way. Before I do the other side, I want to focus in on my breathing more. I close my eyes and I feel, what do I feel moving with my breath? For me, the main difference is around the collarbone, the shoulder, the upper chest, under the armpit and the back in my right hand side. So I can now feel my breath coming up to fill more of the volume of my chest. Oh, my tummy's making noises. I'm going to roll over and do the second side. I'll change. I won't change which way I'm facing, I'll just do back to camera. So I'm lying on my second side. I just take a moment lying, nothing, just doing nothing, making myself comfortable, allowing myself just to be here. And as I allow myself just to be here, I notice, what do I notice? I notice a crease in my favourite jacket hanging up on the coat rack. I lie down again. Sensing, what can I sense? Close my eyes to take my attention more into my body. I can feel my underside opening up into the ground. This is the less comfortable side for my hips, so it takes me a little while to find a comfortable place. My belly's going crazy. And I'm going to take whichever hand I want to just start feeling the ribs on my top side. I move my hands around. Of course, which arm I'm using and how I'm using it affects the way that I'm lying. At the moment I'm using my top arm, my left arm, to feel the ribs around my breast. I've got one hand just above the breast on the pectoral muscles. Feeling movement there. Again, when I keep my mouth closed and I breathe through my nose, the movement becomes clearer. I can feel my fingertips just underneath on the bottom edge of my collarbone. I take a few breaths in one area and then allow my hand to move. Feeling how my breath moves my hand. I'm taking my hand down. I'm going to take my top hand down onto the floor now, and I'm just letting my hand rest on the floor just slightly above and in front of my face, in front of and higher than my face. So if I were to look straight forwards, I would be looking more or less either at the crease of my elbow or at my lower arm. And here I can start to use my underneath arm. I'm using my fingertips again just to feel the bottom of my ribs on the left hand side, the top side. And I feel how my top ribs my bottom ribs, at the front, there's a gap where my belly is soft. And then as soon as I get around to the side, I only have to move a few millimeters to feel that my ribs have swept deep down at such an angle that my ribs have disappeared inside the top rim of the pelvis, the crest of the pelvis. So I can actually, if I can soften the muscle around there, I can dig my fingers in very softly. Maybe better to say I can melt my fingers in between my rib cage and the inside of my pelvis. My fingers are literally inside my body. And I can feel my ribs moving as I breathe. And I just need to rest my bottom arm, so I just lie it down. I just take a breath and rest, feeling how my ribs are moving. And I'm going to do this same trick of taking my top arm to cradle my bottom elbow so that I can reach my bottom hand, my right hand, up over my ribs a little bit easier. So it's my top arm is making the effort to pull my elbow over. And then I can feel the sides of my ribs with a flat palm, a nice flat palm. And I could roll back a little bit to get there. So if I roll back and twist a little open, I can open my ribs and I can get that nice contact with my hand against my ribs. And then I can roll back again, supporting my underneath elbow with my top hand to feel more the back sides of the ribs. I take my hand higher, up the side of my ribs, still supporting my underneath hand, reaching around and hugging me, being supported by the top hand, my left hand, cradling and taking the weight of my bottom elbow, the right elbow. Always just attending to the breath. But as I attend to the breath, noticing what else happens, again I feel my right hip release. I feel the muscles along my spine lengthening and releasing. Then I'm going to let the cradle of the top hand go, and I'm just going to lean forwards a little bit, roll forwards a little bit, so that my right elbow is on the ground. And as I roll forwards, that right elbow can reach a little bit more around to the back of my ribs. And I've come right back down to the waistline again. And for me on this side, I've discovered that I want to as well use my top hand just to help, so that I don't need tension in my right hand to feel the contact, but I can just use my left hand to help me wrap and press my right wrist, my right palm, my right fingers in to the bottom of the bottom of the left hand side of my ribs. And I'm just breathing. I need to rest that arm, so just roll off that side for a moment. And to finish, I'm just going to come back onto that side. I want to just have a roll and a wriggle of just stretching because it feels pleasurable and comfortable. And to finish, I'm just going to roll back onto that second side and get my underneath arm right up under my armpit. So I take my arm up to start with so that I can feel where the armpit is, so that I can get my thumb into my armpit and my fingers around the back. There's a big muscle there, the lats. So basically on the lats, and I can feel my shoulder blade. I could move my arm around so that it's clear where my shoulder blade is. I could also bring my thumb next to my fingers so that as I'm moving that shoulder around, I can feel the shoulder blade moving. That's helpful to me to feel the shoulder blade, because if I can feel the shoulder blade, I know it's not the ribs. So I move my arm around and I feel where the rib moves on top of the shoulder, where the shoulder blades move on top of the ribs. And then I can come back to lying on my side and just bring my top arm back down, so that I'm really just having my hand in the crease of the armpit, the thumb in the front, the fingers in the back. Trying to dig my fingers melt, whatever. Allow my fingertips to be on the side of the ribs. Almost they go in between the ribs and the shoulder blade. They don't go on top of the shoulder blade. So now I know where the shoulder blade is. Last few breaths here. rolling to lie on my back and release and let everything go. I'm lying with my knees bent and my feet standing. I'm feeling the contact of the body with the floor. I feel where I'm breathing. I lengthen my legs and compare the two sides of myself. And I just stay with my own physical sensation, my experience of the movement of the breath. I bend my knees again and bring them over my belly, and I roll a little bit side to side just to soften my lower back and my hips. And I let my head roll, and I let my jaw be soft, and I let my tongue be soft, and I let my eyes drop back into the sockets. I let my jaw hang. One last time, I lengthen my arms and legs on the ground and see how I'm making contact with the floor. See how I feel. And I want to roll to one side and just finish in standing. And see how I feel in standing. Noticing the two sides of myself. What's my breath like? What's my being vertical like? What are the two sides of my ribs like? How does my breath come in and out of my body? Where do I feel it moving me? And I just very slowly begin to step forwards. And I notice the foot that I stepped forwards with and the opposite hand. And I take my next step and I notice the foot that I stepped forwards with. I notice how it makes contact with the ground, and I notice the opposite arm. So for me it's happening naturally. If it's not happening naturally, then you might want to just explore it. I can even look down a little bit and I feel very cat-like. I transfer weight onto my front foot, and as I look down I can see that my front foot and the opposite hand are kind of in a line with each other. I transfer weight over that foot, I look down, and as I transfer the weight onto the front foot, I can see that there's a sort of a line in the space between my front hand, my front foot and the opposite hand. And I just keep going, and once I've found that, I can speed up a little bit, and I can allow my contralateral movement. So that's what I'm doing. It's how we walk normally when we're not thinking about it. And I'm just coming into quicker steps, allowing my arms to swing, feeling the softness of the ribs, feeling how the breath can come in and out, how this diagonal relationship between opposite hand and foot helps my ribs stay soft, my waistline stay soft, my spine stay long and supported without any unnecessary effort. Without any, I mean that's aspirational, but with very little. I've certainly got rid of some, what in Feldenkrais we'd call parasitic effort. All of that effort I was making before, just because of stress. No, I just don't think about anything, and I just walk and I let my arms swing and breathe and look around me and
Just feel the light coming into my eyes. And I know that I've run over time,